Once upon a time, there was a king who had 3 beautiful daughters. The most beautiful of all was the youngest. The first 2 were as beautiful as the day, but the third was as beautiful as the sun itself. As you can well imagine, the king was very proud of her, and yet, strangely enough, though he loved all his daughters, the youngest and most beautiful occupied the last place in his heart. Perhaps because she was the shyest. Whenever the king went anywhere, he always brought back expensive presents for the 2 elder sisters, everything they wanted, but because the youngest never asked, the king never brought her anything. After a time, this made the youngest princess unhappy. One day, when the king was preparing for a journey, the youngest princess went up to him and said, "Dear father, I see that you are preparing for a journey, and I would like to ask you to bring me back a present." "With pleasure, daughter," said the king. "Just tell me what you would like." "Anything you think is suitable, father," said the youngest princess. "If you like, it need only be a pretty flower." "You shall have it," said the king, and set off. The journey was not a long one, and in a few days the king was preparing to return home. As usual, he bought many beautiful gifts for the 2 elder princesses, but forgot about the youngest. Only when he was already on his way home and happened to pass by a beautiful garden full of flowers did he remember the gift for her. He reined his horse, went into the garden, and picked a beautiful flower for his daughter. Suddenly, there was a noise above his head, as though a big bird was flying by, and a voice said, "King, you have plucked my most beautiful flower." The king was surprised. "Who are you that I can hear you but cannot see you?" "I am who I am, and you will see me when I choose," said the voice. "But you have plucked my most beautiful flower, and you must pay me for it. You have 3 daughters. Either you give me one of them as my wife, or else you will die, and so will they." What could the king do? He promised to speak to his daughters and to bring one of them back with him. Only then was he allowed to go home. At home, his daughters were waiting impatiently for him, and the first thing they did was to ask about the gifts. The king gave each of them what he had brought, and to the 2 eldest he gave clothes and jewels, and to the youngest the beautiful flower. And he said sadly, "Listen, this is what happened. Your gift almost cost me my life. When I plucked this flower in the garden of a castle, I heard a voice, and that voice asked for one of you for a wife. Otherwise it threatened all of us with death. Which of you wants to have the gentleman from the castle for a husband?" "I don't, father," said the eldest, "not for anything in the world." "I don't either, father," said the middle sister, "even if it means taking my life." "Then I will have him," said the youngest. "I don't want anything evil to happen to you because of me." The next day the king sat his youngest daughter in front of him on his horse and took her to the garden where he had plucked the beautiful flower. In the middle of the garden was a magnificent castle. The king rode up to the gate, lifted his daughter off the horse, and bade her farewell. "Goodbye, daughter. I hope you will be happy." He then kicked his spurs into the horse's side and rode away. With tears in her eyes, the poor princess went up to the castle door. Hardly had she touched the door when it opened by itself, and as she entered, it closed behind her. The castle was even more beautiful inside than outside. There were fires burning in all the rooms. In the hall, the table was set for dinner. In the bedroom, the bed was prepared. But not a living soul was to be seen. The princess ate, drank, and then went out into the garden to see the flowers. She walked in the garden and picked the flowers until evening. When it began to grow dark, a sound was heard in the air as though a big bird was flying by. The princess was frightened and threw away the flowers, but a soft voice said, "Pick the flowers, my sweet one. Gather flowers, since it gives you such pleasure." The princess was surprised. "Who are you that I can hear you quite clearly but cannot see you?" "I am your betrothed," said the voice. "If you are not afraid, tell me, and I will show myself to you." "Why should I fear my betrothed?" replied the princess. There was a flash of lightning and thunder, and before the princess there appeared a winged dragon as big and strong as a poplar tree. "Here I am, my sweet. Do you still want to take me for a husband?" "I do, dragon," said the princess. "I keep my promises. I shall marry you whenever you wish. Only give me 3 days to sew my wedding dress at home." "So be it," said the dragon, "but you must not tell your family what I am. Come back in 3 days, as you promised. Otherwise I shall die of grief, and your dear ones at home will die with me. Here, take my gold ring. If it whitens, that is a sign that I am ill. If it blackens, it means I am dying. And now I will take you home." The dragon seated the princess on his back, spread his wings, and carried her 100 times faster than a swallow. In the twinkling of an eye, they were in front of the castle of the old king. "Do not forget, my dear," said the dragon. "Say nothing, and in 3 days come back to me, or things will go badly. If you need anything, take a handful of leaves and burn them in a corner of the garden, and I shall come." The dragon flew up into the sky, and the princess went into her father's castle. You can imagine how surprised everyone was, and all the questions they asked the princess. But the princess did not tell them very much. She talked about the dragon's beautiful castle and his wonderful garden, but didn't say a word about her betrothed. "You'll see him yourself when the time comes," she replied, and sewed her wedding dress. "But now you must leave me. I must be ready in 3 days." The sisters realized that something was wrong, and to prevent their younger sister from leaving in 3 days, at night they undid the stitches she had sewn during the day. 3 days passed, and the princess's wedding dress was still not ready. "Don't worry," her sister consoled her. "If you do not return, your betrothed will come for you." The princess let herself be persuaded and remained, but that was a foolish thing. On the 4th day, when she looked at the dragon's ring, she saw that it was completely white. The dragon lay ill in his castle, and the princess's parents were ill with the same illness. The princess wanted to run away to the castle of her betrothed, but again her sisters did not let her. "Wait until tomorrow, when father and mother are better," they persuaded her, and the princess agreed. But that was a foolish thing. When she awoke on the 5th day and looked at the dragon's ring, it was completely black. The dragon lay in his castle, deathly ill, and the princess's parents also became deathly ill. The little princess knew that things were very bad, so she ran into the garden, put some leaves in a corner, and lit a fire. Just then, out of the smoke came a dark figure, and before the princess stood her dragon. "You did not keep your word, my dear," said a weak voice. "And I am dying. If you do not marry me, I shall die by the time the sun sets, and your father and mother will die with me." "Forgive me, my dear," the princess wept. "My sisters persuaded me to stay, and I obeyed them. But now I shall go with you wherever you wish, if only you will make my father and mother well again." "Go and fetch your wedding dress," said the dragon, "and everything will be all right." The princess ran home, and indeed the king and the queen, as if by a miracle, had become better, and the wedding dress from out of nowhere was ready too. The princess put it on, ran into the garden, and seated herself on the dragon's back. The dragon flew away with her 100 times faster than a swallow. In the twinkling of an eye, they found themselves before a chapel where 3 candles were burning. The dragon led the princess to the altar. An old pilgrim was waiting there. When the bride and groom came up to him, an organ sounded, and the pilgrim bound their hands with a scarf, and the dragon and the princess were married. Then the bridegroom said softly, "My dear, look to the left and tell me what you see." The princess looked and said, "I see a dragon's skin and wings lying there." Then the bridegroom said, "My dear, now look to the right and tell me what you see." The princess looked and said, "I see a young prince standing there at my side, as beautiful as day." Then the bridegroom said, "It is I, your bridegroom and king. Because you took me for a husband, you have freed me from an evil curse. But our trials are not yet over, and the power of my enemy, the evil sorcerer, is still not broken. Listen carefully to what I say. Take the dragon's skin and wings and leave the chapel. My servants will be waiting for you in front of the chapel with a carriage to take you to my castle. When you get there, lock yourself in our room and burn the skin and the wings in the fire until the very last scale is destroyed. If you do what I say, things will go well, and I shall come to you at the stroke of midnight, and then nothing in the world will ever part us again. But if you do not take care, if a single scale remains from the skin and wings, things will go badly for us both." "My king, I shall obey your command," said the princess. Taking the dragon's skin and wings, she left the chapel. Outside, a golden carriage with 6 white horses was waiting for her. The servants took the princess to her lord's castle. It was full of people now, and the walls resounded with cries of laughter. Everyone was delighted to think that the lord of the castle was now happily married. The princess locked herself into the bridal chamber and threw the dragon's skin and wings into the fire. In a little while, all that remained of them was a handful of ashes. Only one single scale did not burn, but turned into a beautiful flower, the very kind of flower that the princess's father had brought her as a gift from his journey. The princess liked the flower so much that she forgot what the young king had told her. She took the flower, put it into a golden vase, and then laid down to sleep. A quarter of an hour before midnight, the window opened, and into the room flew the evil sorcerer on a great black raven. When he saw the beautiful flower in the vase, he was pleased, and he said, "The dragon's skin was not all burnt, the bride did not obey, and so he is still in my power. Young king, you shall never, never see your wife again." Then he took the sleeping princess in his arms, placed her on the back of the black raven, and flew out of the window into the dark night. At the stroke of midnight, the young king knocked on the door, saying, "It is I, my dear, it is I, the young king, your husband." But the door did not open, and no sound came from the room. The young king became frightened and knocked on the door for the second time. "Open the door, please, wife, open it, while there is still time." But the door did not open, and not a sound came from the room. The young king waited no longer, but pressed his shoulder against the door, pushed it open, and entered the room. Inside, the scent of the beautiful flower in the golden vase filled the room. In a flash, the king understood what had happened. "This was certainly the work of my enemy, the evil sorcerer. He has carried away my wife, but I shall find her, even if I have to travel the wide world over." The very next day, the young king set out on his journey. A year and a day later, he came to a pilgrim's cottage in a deep forest. "What are you looking for in the forest, young king?" the old pilgrim asked in surprise when the king reached him. "My beloved wife," replied the king. "She was carried away by my enemy, the evil sorcerer, but I shall find her, even if I have to travel the whole wide world. Do you know where she is, wise pilgrim?" The pilgrim shook his head. "I do not know, young king, but our eldest brother will surely know." The old man put a whistle to his lips and blew it. At that moment, an eagle as big as a bull flew out of the clouds. "Eagle, you know what I wish, so obey my command." The large eagle seized the young king in his claws and flew with him up to the clouds. In a split second they had flown over the high mountains and come down to earth on the shores of a large sea. There was the cottage of the oldest pilgrim. "What are you looking for, young king?" asked the pilgrim in surprise when the king stood before him. "My beloved wife," said the king. "She was carried away by the evil sorcerer. Do you know where she is, wise pilgrim?" "I know, young king," said the pilgrim. "Your wife is on a high mountain in the center of an island, far out in the wide sea. She is sleeping there in the shade of a huge oak tree, and will sleep there until you awaken her. But before you can do that, you must get to that island, and it will not be easy. Your enemy, the evil sorcerer, is on guard day and night. He is the king of the fishes and rules the sea and the sky. Listen to what I tell you. When I still lived among people, I was a fisherman and had a good ship and a gold fishing rod. That ship and fishing rod are still standing by the shore. Get into the ship, and it will take you safely to the island of the king of the fishes. When you get near to the island, the king of the fishes will whip up a storm at sea and a tempest in the sky. You must fear nothing, but put a piece of human flesh on the gold fishing rod, and as soon as you throw it into the sea, the king of the fishes will be caught. He will try to pull you into the water, but hold on fast and do not let go of the rod, even though he will come out of the water 6 times, each time in a different shape. The 7th time he will take on the form of a man, and that will be your moment. Boldly draw out your sword and cut off his head. The rest you will be able to do very easily yourself." Then the pilgrim put a whistle to his lips and blew it. An eagle as big as a bull flew out of the clouds. The old pilgrim said, "Eagle, you know what I wish, so obey my command." The large eagle seized the young king in his claws and flew with him up to the clouds. In a few seconds they were over the bay where the ship rocked at anchor. The eagle set the young king down in the ship and flew away. "Thank you, great eagle," cried the young king, and then began to look around for the fishing rod and bait. He found the gold fishing rod easily. It was lying at the bottom of the ship, but it was harder to find the bait of human flesh. Suddenly he spied a shepherd with a herd of sheep in the meadow a short distance away. The young king looked at him for a while, but then said, "No, I cannot kill that lad. I cannot take such guilt upon myself." And he left the shepherd with his sheep. Shortly afterwards he saw a beggar in the distance. The young king looked at him carefully, but then said, as he had the first time, "No, I cannot kill this old man. I cannot take such guilt upon myself." And so he set out to sea without his bait. As long as the island of the Fish King was far away, the young king sailed calmly and contentedly. But as soon as he began to approach the island, the waves began to rise as big as mountains, and a tempest began to blow. The ship bobbed up and down in the water like an empty nutshell. It was time to throw the fishing rod in the water with a bait of human flesh. Without hesitation, the young king seized a knife, cut out a piece of flesh from his thigh, and pinned it onto the gold hook. No sooner did he throw the fishing rod into the water than the line grew so taut that the young king almost fell in. But he held the line with all his strength until finally the king of the fishes rose from the water in the shape of a dragon. The young king cried, "Your efforts are in vain, King of the Fishes. I know it is you, and I shall not let go." The King of the Fishes was furious. He dived to the bottom, and in a while appeared again in the form of a wreath made of seaweed. But the young king was not to be fooled, and cried, "Your efforts are in vain, King of the Fishes. I know it is you." The King of the Fishes was furious. He dived to the bottom, and in a while appeared again in the form of a beautiful water fairy. But the young king was not to be fooled, and cried, "Your efforts are in vain, King of the Fishes. I know it is you." The King of the Fishes was furious. He dived to the bottom, and in a while came up again in the form of an ugly beast. The young king was not to be fooled, and cried, "Your efforts are in vain, King of the Fishes. I know it is you." The King of the Fishes was furious. He dived to the bottom, and in a while appeared in the form of a cloud of steam. The young king was not to be fooled, and cried, "Your efforts are in vain, King of the Fishes. I know it is you." The King of the Fishes was furious. He dived to the bottom, and then he appeared in the form of the king's young wife. But not even this time was the king fooled, and he cried out, "Your efforts are in vain, King of the Fishes. I know it is you." The King of the Fishes screamed and dived down for the last time. When he appeared on the surface again, he was in the form of a man. This was the young king's moment. With his left hand he seized the King of the Fishes by the hair. With his right hand he pulled out his sword, and with a single blow cut off his head. At that very moment the storm died down, and the young king was able to reach the island. On the mountain, sleeping in the shade of a tall oak tree, lay his beloved wife. The young king leaned over and kissed her. At that moment the princess opened her eyes and sighed, "I have slept a long time." "You would have slept forever if I had not awakened you," said the young king, pointing to the head of the evil sorcerer, the King of the Fishes. But now our trials are over. Come, let us go home. Everyone is waiting for us." When the ship with the young king and his beautiful wife reached the shore after sailing 7 days and 7 nights, there was a golden carriage with 6 white horses waiting for them. In a few moments it carried the happy groom and his bride to the king's castle, where a wedding feast was ready. After the wedding feast, the young king and his lovely wife lived happily in love and contentment for ever and